Foreword. In the 1970s, when a non-scholar was curious about Buddhism, there was only about a dozen books on Buddhism readily available. Then, over the next 20 years, the West began to invite masters from the East who had actually practiced and studied Buddhist meditation, and this changed the number and quality of books on this subject. What emerged from inviting actual practitioners in Buddhism to the West was the understanding that Buddhism was a vast and diverse subject. While Christianity was based on the teachings given in the last few years of the life of Christ, the Buddhist teachings consisted of almost 50 years of teachings of the Buddha, filling over 40 volumes. What is also surprising was that while the Buddha was an Indian and taught all over northern India, with his teachings becoming vastly important in Indian culture, by the 14th century of our era, Buddhism had virtually disappeared from India. Not only had Buddhism left India to the surrounding countries, but all the extensive Buddhist teachings which had been written down since the 1st century CE were almost completely destroyed in India. The Buddhist teachings, both in the original Sanskrit and translated into other languages, existed almost exclusively outside India. It was these historical conditions that lead to thinking about Buddhism as having three vehicles, which, of course, is the topic of this book. The first migration of Buddhist teachings occurred about 200 years after the Buddha had passed away. The brother of the famous Buddhist emperor Ashoka took the teachings to the island of Sri Lanka, and these teachings were written down in the 1st century of our era in Pali. These teachings became the basis of what we now call the Theravada school, and these teachings spread primarily to the southern lands of Thailand, Burma, Cambodia, and Vietnam. Because these teachings were taken to Sri Lanka so early, they are considered to be the earliest teachings of the Buddha. In the 3rd century CE, a new movement occurred in which many Buddhists shifted their attention from the Vinaya, which concerned the strict discipline of monks and nuns, and the Four Noble Truths, towards the teachings of the Buddha on compassion and helping others. This shift was not the creation of a new Buddhism, as some have suggested, because the Vinaya was still strictly observed, and the Buddhist teachers, even to this day, often begin with the Four Noble Truths as the foundation of their teachings. Rather, it was more like the establishing of monasteries and nunneries and the setting up of the rules governing these had been established in the 1st centuries of Buddhism, and now it was time to reach out to others, which had always been an important aspect of Buddhist teachings. This movement led to the Mahayana, or the second vehicle of Buddhist teachings. A few centuries of elaborating the Mahayana teachings led to an extraordinary movement called the Madhyamaka school. This school was founded by Nagarjuna and was located in northern India and used the scholarly language of the time, Sanskrit. To greatly simplify, up to this time the Buddhist scholars had been building up the Abhidhamma teachings, which classified all the concepts and ideas of Buddhism. For example, mind was classified into over 100 factors, and each of these were classified into wholesome, unwholesome, and neutral states of mind. Furthermore, the followers of Abhidhamma relied heavily on the teachings of the Buddha, which taught that the outside world, or phenomena as it is called in this text, was solid and real, while ideas and thoughts in the mind were impermanent and not real. The Madhyamaka school, using teachings of the Buddha not emphasized by the Theravada school, were able to show that not only was the mind not solid and empty, but also all of external phenomena was empty as well. Thrangu Rinpoche has said that even when he was learning Buddhism from a great Buddhist master, he had doubts about the emptiness of phenomena. However, with careful study and meditation on this topic, he was convinced and presents some of the most lucid teachings on this subject. In summary, the Mahayana school emphasized compassion and helping others, and the importance of understanding emptiness to achieve enlightenment. To do any work on the Mahayana path, one must begin with the accumulation of merit and wisdom and adhere to strict conduct, both of which are part of the Theravada level of Buddhism. The development of the Mahayana level of teachings led to the establishment of great monastic universities, such as Nalanda University, which contained over 10,000 students and teachers. Here, philosophical views of followers of various Hindu traditions, followers of the Theravada, and followers of the Mahayana studied and debated with each other. Outside these scholarly institutions, there was another type of Buddhist practitioner whom we would call a yogi today. These practitioners did not put on monastic robes and debate each other on the fine points of Buddhist logic, but lived as villagers, often married with children, and practiced a profound type of Buddhism called Tantrism. For example, there was Naropa, a famous scholar who spent his days defeating non-believers in debates at Nalanda University. Then one day, after meeting a Dakini, he left the university and went in search of Tilopa, who was a yogi, and then spent the rest of his years in the forests of India and practicing Tantric Buddhism until he eventually reached enlightenment. The Theravada teachings of the Vinaya, along with the Mahayana teachings of compassion and emptiness, were carried to the northern countries of Pakistan, China, Japan, and Korea. All these teachings, and also the Buddhist tantric practices, were carried to Tibet in a series of waves that lasted from the 8th century until the 12th century. After the 12th century, there was a Muslim invasion of India, in which all the Buddhist colleges and monasteries were destroyed, and almost all of the Buddhist writings were obliterated in India. When early Western scholars first studied Buddhism, they immediately jumped to the conclusion that the Theravada teachings, because they had left India first, were the true Buddhist teachings, and that the Mahayana teachings, which came later, were invented in northern India. They furthermore concluded that the Vajrayana teachings, because they resembled Indian Tantrism, were a degenerated form of Buddhism. Many arguments can be advanced to refute these early views. However, nowadays it seems ridiculous to say that a Zen Buddhist practitioner was practicing an invented Buddhism, or that the Dalai Lama who practices the Vajrayana is practicing a degenerated form of Buddhism. In 1969, Thrangu Rinpoche was invited to the West and began a series of yearly visits to Sami Ling in Scotland, where he shared his vast knowledge with Western students. He first taught the Uttara Tantra and the Jewel Ornament of Liberation. Interspersed with commentaries on these ancient works, he also gave teachings on Dharma topics to the Western students. This book, The Three Vehicles of Buddhist Practice, or the Three Yanas, was one of these teachings. The Three Vehicles of Buddhist Practice takes the reader through the levels of practice, all of which are essential to master if one is to achieve enlightenment. The Theravada level of teachings explains in detail the Four Noble Truths and foundational methods of meditation practices. Thrangu Rinpoche has told his students that they should not in any way consider the Theravada teachings a lower or inferior path. Rather, it is more like the lower rungs of a ladder. You cannot reach the top without using them. Rinpoche then describes the path of the Bodhisattva, the Buddhist practitioner who has vowed to help all beings reach enlightenment before he or she reaches enlightenment. Here, Thrangu Rinpoche gives a very clear and lucid account of that hard-to-define topic of emptiness or non-self. Finally, Thrangu Rinpoche gives a clear account of what is perhaps the most misunderstood level of Buddhist practice, the Vajrayana. Being an accomplished Vajrayana practitioner, he is able to describe this level in experiential terms. Throughout this book, Thrangu Rinpoche points out that all three of the vehicles of practice were practiced and preserved in Tibet. These levels are just three different ways that the Buddha explained the path to enlightenment. The level a reader actually takes depends entirely on his or her own needs, inclinations, and capabilities. Clark Johnson, PhD.